a quick go at that. Hello everyone. Thanks for taking time out to join this panel this evening, which is being held as part of Mekong ASEAN Environment Week, and the panel on protecting people's rights across borders, hydropower development and investors in the Mekong. Over the last 10 to 15 years, we've observed a rapid expansion of hydropower in the Mekong Basin. This has resulted in the natural flows of water, sediment and nutrients, which are central to the health and the productivity of the river and the 70 million people in the basin that depend on it for their lives and livelihoods being disrupted and damaged. And the impacts that are being felt are not only within the vicinity of the dam site, but can extend hundreds of kilometres, including across national borders. Yet it's not only the impacts that are crossing national borders, because large-scale dams require billions of dollars and to be built, so a lot of money is involved. And what we have also observed is the increasing regionalisation of financial flows and investment into these large-scale infrastructure projects. However, while there has been increasing financial flows and companies that are investing in these projects, whether from Thailand, Vietnam, China, Korea and elsewhere, measures to hold these companies accountable and to create remedy for affected communities remain lacking. So challenges remain when impacts are felt to hold these companies to account.
It's okay.
So we are fortunate tonight to have three speakers who have long engaged in, researched and monitored issues around cross-border investments, environment and human rights issues in the region and beyond, and to sort of discuss what are some of the opportunities and challenges that we are facing and what are some of the potential pathways forward to ensure more meaningful remedy and to ensure the rights of people that are impacted by these decisions and processes are protected and addressed. So our first speaker is Kun Sarini Achawanantakun. She is the head of research for Fair Finance Thailand, which is a coalition of organisations that has been monitoring, engaging and advocating Thai banks to improve their policies and practices. So she will talk a bit about sort of the gaps between what is being said and what is actually being done by a number of these companies and businesses as well as banks in the region. Over to you, Kun Sarini.
Thank you, Mr. Kerry. Evening everyone, and it's my pleasure to be here. And I also would like to add that International Rivers is also a member of our Thailand Coalition. So just a brief, explanation of what we do. So basically, we are a member of coalition, and we use the methodology from Fair Finance Thailand from the Netherlands to basically assess publicly disclosed policies of 11 largest private and government-owned banks in Thailand. And we are now in our 5th year of operation. And you can find our website at fairfinanthailand.org. So basically, we score banks across a number of needs. And definitely, climate and human rights are also two of the most important things. So we actually have been observing some positive changes in terms of what banks disclose and what their policies are. So let me just start by maybe giving a brief update on where banks are in terms of the hydropower policy. So right now, there are two banks in Thailand that have announced specific, explicit credit policies regarding hydropower. One of them is Kasikorn Bank. So Kasikorn Bank, in their credit policies regarding hydropower, they actually spells out very clearly that the bank will not finance any hydropower project that that is not adhering to the site equator principles, and also the project is not being financed by international financiers or international banks. So what that means is that any dam project that's not being financed by the likes of ADB or international banks or basically, and as well showing that they have passed the standard of equator principle, which is a little bit, I guess, weird because equator principles in for banks is not really for project companies. But still, what that means is, right now, any dam projects in town that doesn't have any, it's only 100% funded by Thai banks. That means that the bank will not join, will not participate in the consortium. So I think that's a pretty clear policy in that sense. Another bank with a very explicit hydropower policy is TTB, which is from basically amalgamated from two banks. That policy basically doesn't say that they will not finance any kind of hydropower, but it does say that any hydropower projects have to adhere to international standards. And their examples include the World Commission on Dams and the International Hydro Association. So those are kind of the only two banks with explicit hydropower policy. And I think what's interesting is that at the same time we see some commercial bank, for example, which is another large Thai bank. Early this year, they became the first Thai bank to announce their entry into equator principle. So they became the first signatory of equator. But yet, at the same time, they still haven't really announced more explicit, exclusion lists and credit policies. While, Kasikorn Bank, I think internally they have tried to adapt their systems to be more in line with the equator principle. But yet, they haven't announced that they are adopting the principles at all. So I think that, we still see that it's a positive sign that some commercial banks announced the entry into equator principles. So I think according to equator, they have a few years of grace period that we expect to see the reporting based on equator rules maybe as early as next year. So those are kind of the situation, right? And at the same time, 5 of the largest Thai banks have announced that they are adhering to the United Nations guiding principles on business and human rights. So this includes all of the major project finance lenders in Thailand, including KTB, Kun Thai Bank, Bangkok Bank, some commercial bank, Kasikorn Bank. So I think that this is another, we see it as a positive beginning, so to speak, because adhering to the United Nations guiding principles means that includes your responsibility to the supply chain. So which for banks means that you have to be open to hearing grievances and complaints from the affected communities, from the affected stakeholders of your clients, of the companies you finance. So I think this is where we are in Thailand in terms of the financiers policies. On the other hand, we noticed that a number of prominent, I would say, construction firms. In Thailand, we don't really have professional dam operators, I would say, because a lot of the dams are constructed by large constructors, construction companies. So we noticed that a few of them have also adopted or announced the human rights policy, because partly maybe in the past 2 years, the Stock Exchange of Thailand and the Security Exchange Commission, the stock market regulator, have been pushing for listed companies to announce human rights policy. So, but there still remains some obvious gaps, I would say. For example, Hydropower, which is the operator and builder of the Siyamuri Dam in Laos, recently published so-called human rights report. So this is for the year 2021. And if you read that, it actually has some detail. So they actually say we have concluded the human rights risk assessment and impact assessment of all our 5 major operating sites, and that includes 2 dams, including the Sayaburi. But then on the summary of the human rights salient issues, the company only said that we found one salient human rights issue, which is employee safety, employee health and safety, right? So that's an obvious gap because there's no mention of the kinds of transboundary risks and impacts on the community that Gary talked about, and which is kind of well known already because just recently we had a court verdict of the highest administrative court in Thailand on the Sayaburi lawsuit. So I think that's a very glaring, I would say, omission. And so what that means is that yes, it's a good sign that companies and banks have announced these policies and that basically adherence to international human rights principles, but they now have to walk the talk. So it's really not just up to them to do it, but it is up to the CSOs and the media and also academics to hold them to to basically to do what they say essentially in the policy. So I guess that would be my short summary of where we stand in terms of policies of the companies and Thailand.
Thank you, Khun Saranee, especially highlighting and providing some updates in recent developments in terms of some of the policies and processes from the Thai banks in relation to international standards that relate to hydropower, but also highlighting that there is a gap between what companies say and what they actually do, and using that example of CK Power and Savory. For those that are less familiar with the project, this was the first dam that was built on the lower Mekong mainstream in Laos. But while the project is in Laos, it is effectively a Thai dam. 95% of the electricity is being bought by Thailand. It was built by Thai companies and financed by Thai banks. So it does also raise questions, where are those spaces and lines of accountability for the impacts which are not only in Laos but also to communities in Thailand, Cambodia and Vietnam. And so we're going to move on to our next speaker, Dr. Pil Huang, who's the Executive Director of the Oh. Hi. Yeah. So our next speaker is Dr. Pil Huang, who is the Executive Director of Mekong Human Rights Lawyers Foundation and a member of KTNC Watch, which is a network of organizations that monitor and advocate Korean transnational companies. And he will be talking about the Zepian Senam Noi Dam, which many of us here are familiar with, where there was a dam collapse about 4 years ago. This was a dam built in Laos in which two major Korean companies have shareholding. Dr. Wang also recently visited the site, so he'll be sharing some of the information and findings from his visit, as well as some of the work that they have been doing to hold the companies to account. Over to you.
Thank you, Gary. We happened to decide to visit the dam collapse area without any preparation, and we happened to contact Gary, and we happened to be here after the visit to the dam collapse area, and we are really happy to be here to meet you all and to talk about this, especially this case, which concerns a number of Korean companies and the Korean government. I'm also part of this KTNC Watch. We've been working for almost 20 years, monitoring these Korean companies overseas, their operation and their human rights violations overseas. We've done a lot of field investigation in different countries. And the dam collapse in Laos is one of the cases we have been focusing on. So yeah, so I mean, you all know about this case. I mean, it's been 4 years. More than 7 people died or missing, and thousands of people have suffered from this dam collapse. And people say still the case hasn't been solved. And there are a number of issues, but one of the issues that still kind of is an issue is the issue of this meaningful consultation, meaning participation and access to justice, or access to information for the victim families and those affected. And like most of the dam projects, there are a number of different entities involved. Especially for this case, there are 4 major companies combined together to have a concession agreement with the Lao government. Lao company, Thai company, and 2 Korean company. One is private and the other one is state-owned. And I think there are a number of different NGOs or human rights groups in Korea and in Thailand and in other countries. We closely work together to have some advocacy on this issue on different arenas. And then one venue was the UN human rights mechanism. So we submitted complaints to UN Special Rapporteurs, and actually, I mean, a number of people actually submitted these complaints, and we got twice statements from the Special Rapporteurs, and we got this communication sent to different governments and different companies, also twice, and recently we got some replies from like a Korean government or PMPC, the major company who deals with this dam construction. And another venue was what we call national contact point, where you can file a complaint to a company affiliated with OECD country based on the OECD guidelines on multinational enterprises. So we filed this case to Korean NCP, but usually this Korean NCP, they dismiss case without any further kind of substantial review. But for this case, they went as far as coming up with some final statements saying that the companies should provide enough information to the victims and the complainants, and they should be kind of continue to be engaged with complainants. And actually, these two venues and the results of our complaints, that was the kind of basis for us to contact companies and have a visit just last week to the dam collapse area. So these are some of the pictures we've taken during our visit last week. So some houses are newly built, and some houses are still under construction. But I mentioned it later, but most of houses are newly built. I mean, it's been almost completed. And the one picture is about cassava farm, which were given to the affected villagers. So it's a new land they are given after the disaster. But as you can see, it's not some kind of, just 1 hectare or 2 hectare for, each family. It's kind of, it looks like an industrial farming area. And that's what actually one of the staff members of that PMT told us. And so many of the, much of the land given to these villages were used as industrial farming, cassava land, banana plantations, and so it's not like the rice field the people had before. And the second picture, it's a picture of a school fences, because when we visited one of the mostly affected village, the Hinla, the head of the village told us that, we are asking, so what kind of additional request or demand do you have to companies or the government? And he said, well, there is this school without fences completed, without the gate completed. We want the fences completed, and we want the gate with real gates. That was the final comment he made, and I think that was very symbolic, because the companies are saying that they paid all the money the government requested 100%, and still, the basic kind of infrastructure is not there. So we thought that was very symbolic, telling many things about the situation there. So the compensation, obviously, again, it's an issue of consultation and participation and access to information. And at the same time, even though most, what they call, they say most of the compensation have been settled, there's still one item that is called other assets or the other possessions, which villagers don't have enough proof. That, for example, there are like 2 boxes of rice in their room, things like that. And but the problem is, it's been 4 years, and the companies are saying now we're going to have an individual review of each case. But I cannot think of doing individual review because there's no proof. It will be a process of finding out whether this person is credible or not. So I think there is a problem there. And also, there are family members or the neighbors who suffer from trauma and all these, friends dead, neighbors dead, and we to a couple of villagers we asked about the situation. I mean, how did you overcome all this trauma? And they said we didn't overcome. I mean, we asked about the mental health and psychological support. They said they received none. Yeah, and also this all compensation is so uniform, and we cannot actually kind of evaluate properly whether this compensation is according to their needs. And as you probably know, it's not just about compensation. The government or the province, they are talking about this master plan, which is nothing to do with compensation, but it's something to do with development. And they are saying new housing is according to this master plan. But as I said, I mean the new land, given the housing itself, it's not according to their way of life before. So it was like before it was houses, just river nearby, rice farm nearby. The house they built themselves according to their needs, but it's not the case right now. And the new lands given, so it's a kind of industrial farming, or it's not suitable for rice farming. So there is an issue of sustainability. Yeah, I think that's about it. But I mean, we found out that for villagers, I mean, they have their concerns, but it's very hard to express to the governments or the companies themselves. But they know the problems, and they want to solve the problems, but maybe the system is not there for them to actually rely on. It's it's kind of a final comment from me. So there's a student activist 32 years ago, powerless, helpless, chased by the police. But there is, after 27 years, a lawyer who convened 1,000 lawyers to sign up for the petition for the impeachment of the Korean president. So what I'm trying to say is, I mean, it takes time. And the other day I was talking about, so it takes time, and we have to never give up. And so aggressively, creatively, proactively, take it easy and take time. That's what I said the other day. Thank you.
Thanks, Pyokyu. Thanks for sharing your findings and about the situation following the dam collapse. I think it highlights a number of things. One of the supposed, which is also linked to what Khun Sarini mentioned about the gap between what's on paper or in policy and practice. So one of the key underlying principles that's in a lot of the government of Laos policies related to hydropower is that no one is made worse off. And when we're talking about being better off or not worse off, it's not, and you highlighted this, it's not only about material well-being, but emotional, mental, because this was a major displacement, not only physical, but it also raises the question here, whose interests are being prioritised? So for those that are unaware, this dam collapsed in 2018, and as Pyokyu highlighted, even in his most recent trip a couple of weeks ago, some of the resettlement houses are still under construction. Yet the dam itself started operating at the end of 2019. So those that suffered were still waiting while the dam companies were making money from selling electricity shortly after the dam collapse. So whose interests are being prioritised? Also importantly, highlighting the persistence and the different efforts that we do need to continue, including through the mechanisms that are available, and creating new mechanisms and spaces, particularly where within country there are political challenges in terms of freedom of expression. So thank you for sharing those. And our next speaker is Kun Pichamon Yopantong. Sorry, I'm terrible with Thai surnames, I apologize. She is currently the Vice Chairperson of the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights, which has a mandate to promote, disseminate and implement the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. So she'll share some thoughts, and I'll over to you, Kun Pichamon.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Gary, and thank you also to International Rivers and SCA Junction, as well as other co-organizers for organizing this really important event. And it gives me so much pleasure to be on the same panel as these three amazing human beings. So can I just check that everyone can hear me all right? Yep. Okay, then I won't take my face mask off then. As Gary was saying, I'm here representing the Working Group on Business and Human Rights. We have a much longer name, which I will not recite here. But suffice it to say, again, as Gary noted, we are mandated by the Human Rights Council with disseminating, promoting, as well as implementing the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. The principles were already mentioned by Kunsarani here in relation to the fact that 5 Thai banks have endorsed the UNGPs. And that has hopefully paved the way for better behavior down the line. At the same time, Hugh has highlighted how the special procedures mandate holders had joined a communication to the Lao government, as well as to businesses involved in the Africa Dam collapse. The UN Working Group was one of those mandate holders who joined that communication, of course. And so altogether, we really are concerned about the nature of the business-related human rights violations that we are seeing occurring, not just in the Asia-Pacific region, but globally. At the same time, it is also even more concerning the fact that we are seeing the greater frequency of strategic litigation against public participation actions, or SLAP cases, being leveraged against human rights defenders. And we are also concerned that there are still ongoing non-compliance when it comes to not just soft law instruments like the UNGPs, but even when it comes to mandatory legal measures such as those being promulgated, especially in Europe, like from France, but also from countries like Australia. I'm thinking here, of course, of the Modern Slavery Act. That being said, it is, of course, better that we have such soft law and hard law instruments than none at all. And so with respect to the UN Guiding Principles, I'm not entirely sure how many people here are already very familiar with the Guiding Principles, but let me very briefly kind of summarize them to you. So the UN Guiding Principles themselves it was a fraught process in terms of arriving at it and creating consensus, but it nonetheless advocates 3 pillars. So the first one is the state duty to protect human rights. The second is the business or corporate respect for human rights. And the third is the corporate responsibility to respect human rights, And then the third one is access to remedy. As you can already tell from the language of the UNGPs, it is written as an overarching, comprehensive document. And in order to achieve consensus, there are certain aspects, certain issues that had to remain outside of the scope of the guiding principles. And this includes considerations of extraterritorial obligations on the part of businesses. But the issue of extraterritorial activities of businesses, though, is incorporated into the commentary to the UN Guiding Principles. And it is noted that even though currently in international human rights law, extraterritorial activities of businesses aren't necessarily aren't things that the state has to control or regulate, it doesn't mean that they don't have that responsibility to control or regulate, meaning that there is that scope. If a government and a state were to want to do more in this space, they have the ability to do so. And so in light of that, the UNGPs do advocate that whenever possible, it is important that businesses undertake due diligence, not just within the jurisdiction in which they are domiciled, but also when they operate across borders. It's also the case that this also applies to states. That when states, especially if they are owning a business, so in the case of state-owned enterprises, they should also have that responsibility to ensure that their transborder operations do not have egregious human rights impacts. And so in light of that, in terms of the UNGPs, we have to kind of consider it alongside other regulatory developments as well as other soft law instruments. Some of you may well be aware of the Maastricht Principles on extraterritorial obligations. This, of course, is really more, in one sense, of an aspirational document and setting out what more can be done in this space. But there are also, as Consarani was pointing out, other guidelines such as the Equator Principles and so forth that have also been used in order to promote better business conduct in this space. The working group itself advocates for what's known as a smart mix of both mandatory and voluntary measures in order to ensure better business respect for human rights. Of course, all of this is easier said than done. And as Gary was rightly pointing out, there is still a great, in one sense, discrepancy when it comes to what businesses say they are complying with and adhering to, and what is actually happening in practice. Same goes for governments. I don't think I need to elaborate on that, really. But so in light of, and I'm sorry, I think I'm starting to breathe in my face mask too much, so I'm going to take it off. The challenges of COVID. But in terms of the challenges then, in terms of how do we reconcile what is on paper with what needs to happen in reality, I'm not entirely sure, I'll be honest, whether I can give you any helpful suggestions or insights in that regard. But what is for sure, though, are the challenges that human rights defenders face, that people like those on the panel here today face, when they're trying to ensure greater corporate accountability, especially in a cross-border context. We know that the hydropower sector that operates in this region is not very well regulated, in the sense that there are not much that they have to abide by in terms of standards or practices, norms of practice. That being said, again, as both speakers here pointed out, this is not to say that there have not been really useful and promising efforts to push them in the right, to push hydropower companies in the right direction. At the same time, and this is not unique to hydropower companies, but we also see that, especially when it comes to cross-border investments, companies often operate through a very complex vertical chain of ownerships. And so oftentimes you are actually dealing with subsidiaries, not with the parent company, and when it comes to demanding for accountability, that really complicates things so much. Even when we're investigating the allegations of business-related human rights abuses that get sent our way, part of the challenge for the working group is identifying the range of subsidiaries that are involved in said allegation. You may have shell companies to deal with, but it's also the case that even when a parent company says that it will adhere to a particular principle, let's say the UN Guiding Principles, it could very well be, and it's often the case, that the subsidiaries involved have no idea what the parent company has actually committed itself to. So in light of that, there is still a lot of challenges in terms of ensuring that the chain of ownership also aligns with a chain of accountability from the parent company through to the subsidiaries and of course through to the broader supply chain as well. The other issue is that we see, of course, vested interests when it comes to the development of hydropower across beyond this region. And we, of course, know that increasingly the discourse around hydropower development is getting integrated into discourses about green development, about renewable energy. And of course, there's plenty of debate. I won't go into all of it here, but I suspect that many of you in the room are already aware of the challenges involved when it comes to ensuring that hydropower projects are actually as green and as renewable as they claim to be. The other issue, and this is something that Pilkyu had touched upon in his presentation, is the problem of access to remedy. It is a fundamental, critical component of the UN Guiding Principles that businesses and states offer victims access to remedy. In the case of the Asapa dam collapse, it is about not just compensation, it is also about rehabilitation. But what does remedy actually look like? What constitutes effective remedy is something that varies from case to case. And so we can't really approach it with a one-size-fits-all attitude. But oftentimes that is what companies want to have, right? They want to have a clear idea of what constitutes remedy so that they can implement it more effectively, streamline it, and so forth. But again, in reality, on the ground, what one community needs as a remedy will often look different from what another community needs. And so it is also about being able to understand what is at stake, but also what exactly are the local needs of the communities that have been impacted by business-related human rights violations. And so let me come here to the opportunities, because I often get told that I am very pessimistic, and I'm trying to change my ways as part of my post-COVID resolution. But in terms of opportunities, I think we are seeing that the costs of bad business behavior are increasing. Whether it be through consumers, whether it be through human rights defenders, we are seeing them getting pressured into behaving better. And whilst it should be ideally the case that we don't have to pressure anyone to integrate human rights considerations into how they do business, currently we are still at that stage where we need human rights defenders, rights holders, to be as vocal as possible in communicating to businesses as well as to states what is needed, how they need to do better, and that all needs to happen now. At the same time, we're also seeing a growth in interest in the National Action Plans on Business and Human Rights, or NAPs. Thailand, of course, is well known as being the first country in this region to adopt a National Action Plan, or NAP. And of course, part of the National Action Plan for Thailand really focuses on the issue of cross-border investment and multinational corporations. With Thailand's, in one sense, lead, we're also seeing other countries in this region taking an active interest in developing their own NAPs. So we have Indonesia, for instance, we have Malaysia. I'm also hearing that Laos is interested in designing and adopting a national action plan. Pause there. But effectively, in one sense, these are, and Vietnam too, yes, of course. I mean, even though these, again, are not, in one sense, legally binding in the way that I know many human rights defenders are hoping they will be, they nonetheless provide a first step towards state recognition of the importance of business and human rights. I mean, in many parts of this region, even the term business and human rights is a rather controversial one, right? To talk even just about human rights, not just about corporate social responsibility or responsible business conduct, is seen as already quite a big step forward. But having said that, it's not enough for states just to implement not just to adopt national action plans, they also have to implement it. And so really, even in the case for Thailand, the Thai NAP is just this kind of the starting point for what we hope will be many more or a much bigger push towards mandatory human rights due diligence. Which brings me to my final point, which is that globally, I think we are seeing a shift towards mandatory human rights due diligence, that recognition and also requirement for businesses to do better and have that be legally enforced. As I mentioned previously, we are seeing this emerge from France. We are also hearing, of course, about the EU's draft directive on corporate sustainability due diligence as well. And so this is part, hopefully, of a much bigger international global push. And as more countries take on these measures, the anticipation is that it's going to create a flow-on effect where countries in Southeast Asia or in the Asia Pacific more broadly are going to feel compelled to do better in their practices too, because of the nature of supply chains and so on and so forth. But so altogether, it's also pointing to how there is a growing desire globally, an appetite for businesses to not just stop with soft law and not just to stop with compliance, but to really integrate human rights considerations in all aspects, in all stages of their business operations. I can't really comment too much on the development of the international kind of legally binding treaty on business and human rights, but that is also currently in progress at the United Nations, and hopefully we will see more happening soon in that space. And so I think I need to conclude now. I'm looking at Gary. He's spoken too much already as it is. But allow me to just reiterate that the UN Working Group, our role is to assist with the implementation, to promote the implementation of the UN guiding principles. So if anyone here would like to learn more about what we do, you're very welcome to reach out to us. If you do have any allegations of business-related human rights abuses in this region that you would like to report, you're very welcome to reach out to us as well. We have a dedicated portal through UN special procedures to accept such allegations and to investigate them. And what we do afterwards is to issue communications that Q had pointed out earlier. Because we, at the end of the day, believe that this is fundamentally about rights holders. It's about ensuring that rights holders are being respected, that they are also being celebrated, and that businesses and states are held to account when their businesses and their operations and activities have adverse impacts on the people who stand to suffer the most. So I will stop there, but thank you so much again for having me this evening.
Thank you, Kuchimon, for that great overview in linking not only going from case study of what's been happening in Laos, but to also some of the trends and developments globally and how that's playing out. Not only just focusing on the challenges, of which many of us are aware of many, but how some of that, it's been a common theme through many of the panels during Mekong ASEAN Environment Week, because these are structural issues with very powerful invested interests that are driving, but there are, not only in terms of these developments globally, but the movements that are emerging through different parts of the region that are utilising and referencing some of these guidelines, but also ensuring that it's building from the grassroots. And good to hear that there are different opportunities to better hold corporations to account and to ensure that there is greater respect for the rights of people, the rights of environment, and that there are opportunities to continue this work and ensure greater accountability. Now we're, part of this, we wanted also to have an opportunity to share and discuss. So I would like to open the floor for any questions or comments from the audience that you may have to any of the panelists, or sharing from your own experience about this topic.
Yes. So I just have one thing to add that I forgot. That if anyone is interested, Fair Finance Thailand did a case study on it's called something like the challenges of bank financing in the Mekong, and the cases of Siyaburui and Sapiens it's on our website if anyone is interested. It's a little bit old, I think it was like 2019, but a lot. Okay, I think so. I was going to say it's still. I mean, the major points are still relevant.
Yes.
So when we talk about this mandatory due diligence legislation or national action plan, I think we have to see the context. I mean, it's basically mostly concerned with extraterritorial jurisdiction or low governance. But in most cases, it's an issue of rule of law in certain countries. For example, the debt case in Laos, well, there are laws. I mean, I'm a lawyer by profession, so when the incident happened, I tried to look up some laws related. So there are a number of laws directly related to the debt rights. There are law on water resources, there are law on electricity, there is a law on environmental protection, there is a law on construction. It's more than 7 or 8 laws are related, and in those laws, there are some certain provisions. I mean, I found out that there are obligation of companies involved, obligation of the government or the officials concerned. But the problem is, most of the provisions, they don't apply. I mean, it's not implemented in reality. It's law on the paper, I mean, just in the paper. So maybe if it's an issue of a kind of, even though international or transnational corporations are concerned, if it's an issue of, local issue, I think there is a, we have to somehow, to a certain extent, focus on the rule of law issue in those countries. Thank you.
Yes.
Now it's like we're talking amongst ourselves. If anyone does have any questions
Please
or
take your
comments.
questions and
Yeah.
Otherwise, we just discuss.
That's right. But no, I just wanted to add on what you were saying there too. I mean, I completely agree. I think rule of law is the most important thing, right? So we can't have we can't have progress feasibly if we don't see the climate and the attitude towards respecting the rule of law change, especially in this region. That being said, I think there are still opportunities, right, in terms of how we can go about holding corporations to account. I think the Atipa dam collapse is perhaps a good example with respect to how, if you are encountering a lot of roadblocks in the domestic Lao context, there's still that opportunity to try and hold the South Korean companies involved accountable. And I think kind of globally we're seeing that trend where if you can't hold the state involved accountable or the domestic corporations accountable, you try to reach out to the parent company that normally is domiciled in another jurisdiction. And especially if that jurisdiction is, and forgive me for using this term, the Western world, that has yielded some interesting outcomes in terms of, again, greater accountability. But I mean, we would hope that there are legislative changes underway and soft law changes as well. And of course, South Korea has not issued a standalone national action plan, has a chapter in its human rights action plan. But I am curious to hear whether you see that as at least one step in the right direction, or do you see that as actually being problematic? So it ended up being a question for him. So again, if anyone has any questions they want to throw into this, please feel free.
We still have time. Feel free to give a response. But
Yeah, I mean, many people saying that this national action plan are useless, but well, I don't think so. I mean, I can say it's far from enough. And what we are trying to do was any sentence, any expression within the national action plan, we try to mobilize. For example, there's a mentioning about Korean companies overseas. We should do something about Korean companies overseas. That's the sentence within this national action plan. So that sentence we use when there is some case in Indonesia. I mean, you mentioned the Korean companies overseas. You should do something, and they are at least try to do something. So it's not perfect, and it's been done without much consultation. But what we are doing is just try to mobilize, utilize those components.
Sorry, we're just like talking among ourselves. Sorry about that. No, I just wanted to add that I believe that things like national action plan and as well as these policies that companies say is really better than having none, because that shows you that the government or the companies are saying that this is what we think is important, right? And like for example, in Thailand and also international vehicles, we were able to bring the representative of the affected villages to a closed-door meeting with the major banks at the Bank of Thailand, precisely because those banks announced the human rights policy and their adherence to UNCP. So we can say, okay, as part of your policy, you have to listen to stakeholders that are affected. And so I think that this is still, at the very least, it's a good opening. It kind of gives you the rationale or the foot in the door. They have no choice but to listen. So I think for us in Thailand, that's why I think we need to get more organized and maybe clearer in, for example, we know that the hydropower investment in the Mekong doesn't matter where exactly it is, but it's just going to add on. It's just a list of risks already, right? It's like basically more dams, more cumulative risk, and a lot of those risks will be similar. So I think that maybe instead of having kind of piecemeal complaints, so what maybe we can do is compile like a big list of major risks of hydropower financing in the Mekong, and then bring that to the attention of the Bank of Thailand or the banks, and say, hey, look, no matter where you finance in the lower Mekong, these are going to be the risks that you have to face. And I think that also maybe connect to what the Bank of Thailand, what initiative they are doing now is working on the so-called taxonomy. So this would be basically a criteria of the so-called green projects. And I echo what Commissioner said earlier that this is very going to be contentious, right? Because hydropower companies will say our projects are green, because hydropower is renewable. But of course, we have to say that actually, if we want, I mean, is it okay to say that the project is green without looking at the social impacts and the environmental and infrastructure risk? So it's not just enough to look at power itself in comparison to, of course, it's renewable compared to fossil fuels, for example, right? But that's not enough to call it green. So I think that the engagement of CSOs and academics in the development of taxonomy is also going to be very important going forward for the hydropower.
Thank you. Now you've had lots of time to think, so I'm expecting questions or comments from the floor. Ianka.
Right, it's all right. Good evening. Yeah, it's all right. Yeah, I think I think I can use this one. Brevity from Project Savannah, Southeast Asia. I keep thinking, hearing, listening from our speakers here. I think I come from the the background of the people who's living in the area. Like I lived in Laos for 4 years, and we have been monitoring, working in the region for some time. Right, we went to Korea after the dam collapsed to protest in front of the company, but I think our focusing was always with the actor. We're looking at the actors in the region. Of course, we are looking at the government, the people, CSO, and the company, right? Which is bigger, getting and growing up all the time. And I just want the, I know all of us are doing here and there, trying to push in the part that we can. The same as when people talking about the monitoring group in Korea with the Korean company. Maybe it's the same as when people ask about the Thai energy, the mechanism, right, in the organization, how come we cannot do enough, right? Because the Lao people will say that if the Thai stop buying electricity, the dam will be in. But I mean, everyone knows this, the whole story is more complex than that. I guess I'd like to hear a little bit more, maybe one small question to you. I mean, what are you, when you're looking at the company, for example, I remember when we were in Korea, we went there in front of the company, right? We submitted the letter, nobody come out, right? And we went to the parliament, to the import-export banks and talked to all of them. What are you, like for this time you went to Laos, right? I understand that you also tried to talk to the company. And I know the Laos is now still allowing Korea to do the project in South Laos. It's still the Korean area there. What are you looking at? I mean, how do you think of the future of the whole process? You think among us, right, all the actors, including CSO, we have some, there is some possibility that we can be there, talking to them and make the situation better on the stuff, focusing on Korea, the process in Korea.
Actually, that was the question we were asking to each other with Gary the other day. Well, I mean, it's been quite a while, and we originally planned to go there 3 years ago, but because of COVID-19, we couldn't go there, and also there are issues of this some danger and things like that. But this time, I think we at least tried to get as much information as possible. So we were lucky to have a member of the National Assembly to get Western Power, state-owned corporation, to come to National Assembly to report or submit some information. So we found out, I shared the information with Gary and others. We found out that from this year they got, they make a lot of profit from this dam, and by next year they will kind of, make even all this the cost they spend. So I mean, yeah. So first we try to find out the information, any information related, and then we try to, discuss, you and Gary and others, all of it, all of us try to find out the ways to, what kind of remedies are there, to be, we should demand, request, or is there any kind of, if their life is not sustainable, then there must be some kind of alternative approach. So what kind of request, what kind of, ways we can explore. So I don't have the answer, but it's obvious that we have to seek, explore the answer together. But till now, I'm trying to get all the information as much as possible.
I just add a little bit, and I think it's sort of building off Gilky's last slide as well, which is around persistence, because we cannot let them get away with it. Need to be persistent, and some of this goes beyond SEPI and Senam. So, if you're talking about Korea Western Power, who we mentioned, they're now also involved in an upcoming mainstream dam. Similar with CK Power, we heard about Sayaburi. They're now involved in Wongkabang, because they keep expanding to expand their business interests. So we do need to maintain our persistence in trying to hold them to account. For there is no single, we don't know, okay, this is going to work 100%, but to continue to advocate and try and find ways to hold them to account, because building on these existing examples, but the fight is much bigger than that and is a longer term battle, I feel.
Yeah, I guess I, ask you directly because it's really special to have a friend from Korea with us. It's pretty rare. Yeah. Thanks to you.
Yang doesn't consider me a real Korean.
I was thinking to myself, if you pronounce his name correct.
Noted. Any other questions or comments from the floor? Yes, Shatika.
Let me try this one again. If you want to be Korean, I should address you as Mr. Lee Jong-hun. I'm Sujita from Oxfam and I'm from Cambodia. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and knowledge. I want to continue a little bit from the point. At the time when the dam collapsed in Cambodia, we also experienced the rapid volumes of water coming downstream, and those communities living along Simpang district in Cambodia side also suffer. But I think I really like to support that we give the focus to the victims and the villagers that suffer much severe downstream from the dam. And because we don't have so many, we don't really have the opportunity to hear from them, and your team has recently visited, if you could share any sentiments, hopes, or aspirations of the people that you talk to, like what they are, how they are feeling now, and apart from the legal avenue that we all try and hope for to pursue to bring justice for them, anything else that they have shared with us, I think it would be useful to us.
In addition to this business and human rights, actually, for last almost 5-6 years, my main area of kind of concern is disaster and human rights. So I kind of lived with the families of victim families whose high school students, more than 200 died, sinking of a ferry, and I kind of worked with these victim families whose family members died, more than 1,000 because of some toxic elements they inhaled. And so I was very interested in the psychological status and these mental health issues. And so I talked with one of the head of these villages, and he was saying, through these 4 years, this is the first time we have the real talk about the situation of suffering we have. I mean, that was so we kind of. I mean, there was another lawyer, and we three of us kind of, almost cried together. So maybe, I mean, it's easy to say about meaningful consultation and the listening to others, but sometimes it's very important to really listen. I mean, to these people's voices, and maybe it's kind of a starting point. I mean, we have been listening, but maybe not enough. I mean, so we have to listen more and more precisely, and try to find ways to together. It can be a judicial process to start with, but there can be at least some ways to work together with villagers and try to change things. That's what I thought. And another issue was concerning this cause of dam collapse. I felt so bad because we found out through the information given by Western Power that there are 4 reports concerning the cause of dam collapse. One is this, we all know this international independent expert panel report, and another one is from Laos government. The other one from TMPC, the big company, and the last one is SK. And the last report says it's natural disaster, and the other 3 reports say it's man-made disaster. And now they are fighting in Singapore through international arbitration. SK and the other 3 companies. Here are people who are affected, the perpetrators. They are fighting each other. So, I mean, I think this kind of situation is very familiar. Big perpetrators, they have dispute among themselves, excluding the victims. I mean, this is the case in many cases. But anyway, so that's one of the information we've got through this preparation of this visit. And we are not quite sure right now what this means and what it should mean to the people affected. But at least we have to get some more information and have some decision on how to kind of intervene or not intervene in this process. Thank you.
Yes.
So there is a question from Facebook Live. So there are many countries in our region that purchase their electricity from Laos. For example, Singapore, who recently agreed to buy more power from Laos. The question is, can we try to sensitize their customer, or in other words, how do we increase people consciousness or sensitivity or action against this action and to have the sympathy toward the impact happening in Laos?
Yeah, it's very difficult. We ask that question ourselves a lot, because the impact happens far away from us. So I think that I would just like to add what Gary said earlier about the importance of persistence. I think we just have to persist. And in Thailand, sometimes it's situational, I guess, as well. Because like right now, there's more, I guess maybe a little bit more awareness on this whole scheme, because as you all know, in Thailand, the electricity prices are going through the roof, basically. And so suddenly consumers start to ask, like, what's going on? Why is my electricity bill suddenly so expensive? And so this provides like an opportunity for a lot of us to say, well, by the way, if you look at the reserve margin, we have like 50 plus, 60 plus % already. It's way too much. And why is it so high? Partly it's so high because we're buying electricity from projects that we don't need. It's unnecessary basically. And it's not just unnecessary, but then you look at big dams, for example, then it is very risky and it creates a lot of hardship for people around the region. So I think but if we just, I guess, give up and say, oh, it's too difficult to communicate, and we just kind of like stop doing it, then when the situation or circumstance arise where people might be more interested, then this, then we're going to lose that opportunity to, I guess, increase awareness about this. So I think that it's really important to just keep persisting, and this issue will not go away anyway, right? So as long as I think that there's still plans to build many more dams in Laos, and like right now in Thailand, we are still kind of debating this issue of precisely the need for buying more electricity from Laos, and then not to mention this bigger picture like geopolitics. People say, okay, this is like Chinese influence, and is Laos going to be at risk of being under more influence of China when they have more risk of default, for example, on their debt obligation. So in the bigger picture, I think that this is not just a one-time kind of issue anyway, but it's going to be a long-term issue. The three new dams in Laos that are under discussion in Thailand that we are thinking of buying the electricity. The PPA, the power purchase agreement, is reportedly going to be 35 years. 35 years. So I used to be an investment banker, and I've never seen a 35-year power purchase agreement. Sayaburi, which is a huge dam, and the first dam built in the lower Mekong, that one was 29 years. 29, which is already very long. So in the past, it's 29 to 31 years power purchase agreement. Now we're seeing or about to see 35-year power purchase agreement. So we're really locking in, and the more dams, more electricity we buy from that source, that's basically crowding out all the other sources we could be looking at, like solar. So I think that this is a long-term, necessarily a long-term discussion that we just need to keep pushing and keep showing people different sides of it, and it really has real impact on the because nobody doesn't use electricity, right? So I think at the end of the day, this is a conversation we can always have, and always kind of maybe try some new ways of telling.
If I could add just a couple of brief points. I think part of it, yes, there's a long way to go, but part of it's also working with others and finding different ways. And I think Mekong Asian Environment Week is a great example of that. So just outside this room here, and for those after this session, please do look at, there's a photo exhibition just on this floor about the last sunset of the Mekong. We're just trying to communicate these issues through visual ways, and similarly downstairs another exhibition which is raising questions about cross-border investments and where is Thailand's electricity coming from. And a number of people in this room have also been collaborating with the Thai Consumer Council to raise awareness among consumer groups to draw that link between electricity prices and where that is being sourced from both financial grounds in terms of the price consumers are paying, but also on environmental and social justice grounds. So some of that, it's not just us in the room, there are other groups and networks that are working on these issues through different angles, so we need to keep building that movement and network to raise awareness and to bring about changes in the longer run.
Sometimes this official visit by the UN working group or special rapporteur have some impact on countries. The way we did before was, because we don't have any acquaintance with these special rapporteurs, we went all the way to the Geneva and then grabbed their hands and, do you know Korea? You come to Korea, we will invite you as in an informal seminar, and when they come, we try to explain the situation, and once they understand, they decided on the official visit. But for Thailand and Laos, if someone is here, she understands the situation, the only thing you have to do is threaten her to convince other members, right? Maybe you can have some comments on this official visit.
Thank you for that review. But But no, in all seriousness, I think that's a great question, and you know, what Gary's and Sari's responses are really top notch in terms of highlighting the work that's currently underway in terms of raising consumer awareness and also galvanizing consumer support for greater accountability, especially when it comes to the energy and hydropower sectors. I think in terms of, I just wanted to pick up on something that you were saying, Yu, in terms of, you know, it's about listening to the needs and the voices of those affected, and I think part of that is a broader, bigger question about the fundamental power dynamics, right? We often ask who's speaking, but we often don't ask who's actually listening. And that's where a lot of the divergences in understanding, I think, occur, which is you have people on the ground trying to relay their concerns and their fears, but then the people who sit at the top, who write things like, you know, the equator principles and other such things, might not necessarily always be aware of what's happening on the ground. So, I mean, I agree. I think in terms of the UN guiding principles, one of the things I think we'll be trying to do more of in the future is how can we localize it? How can we socialize the UNGPs to better take into account the experiences of those who are affected on the ground by business-related human rights violations? Similarly, I think you mentioned country visits, and as a working group, we agree. We have seen how country visits, when we get to speak, not just to governments and to businesses, but of course with civil society and with communities impacted, how that makes a world of difference in terms of our understanding of what needs to be done and what can feasibly be done in those contexts. So, I mean, absolutely, we are very open to receiving recommendations, suggestions in terms of which countries we ought to be prioritizing for said visits. You know, and it is also an opportunity for civil society and other stakeholders to reach out to us as part of those visits as well, to provide input so that we have that better understanding of what's happening on the ground. And I mean, it makes me really happy to hear that you also think that these country visits can have an impact and have had an impact. So the other thing I think I wanted to draw out from what Gary was saying earlier is that, you know, when it comes to hydropower in particular, again, it can be framed and will be framed as a renewable energy source. But therein lies the problem with even the broader discourse on renewable energy and how it's a panacea in one sense to climate change, right? We're hearing increasingly about how solar farms, wind farms, and the transition minerals needed for, you know, the development of renewable technologies are actually causing and have the potential to cause even greater problems for communities. And of course, hydropower density goes without saying. So I think part of the problem is that we are not yet applying fully a human rights lens to how we address the climate change problem and broader issues to do with environmental degradation. And what I wanted to just end on is that, you know, we have also been noticing how governments will usually become much more attuned and sensitive to human rights concerns when it's when they are put in the spotlight, but also when they have to do things like the Universal Periodic Review or UPR, and deliver that, you know, as part to the Human Rights Council and so forth. So I think, you know, going back to what someone said previously, I think there are multiple pressure points that can be leveraged in order to affect meaningful and longer-term change. But this will, of course, vary from situation, from context to context, and it really does depend on the work that, you know, all of the people here in this room today, listening online and elsewhere, are willing to do in order to stand up for the rights, not just of your rights, but also the rights of others.
Any more questions or comments from the floor? Yes.
Hi, thank you all again for your presentations, and thank you, Gary, for moderating. I didn't have really a new comment to make per se, but just kind of echoing what was being said. Well, also thank you Mel for having this week organizing the CSOs and local communities. And I kind of wanted to say it is great to hear about these movements towards maybe corporate accountability, but at the same time, I do understand there are lives at stake while we are doing these talks and taking our time to try to see what would be better in terms of corporate accountability. But at the same time, there are lives at stake while we're talking about these things, and I just kind of wanted to echo, I think, what Gary was saying earlier about different CSOs cooperating together, and I also believe that maybe, like, not only in the Southeast Asian region, but even outside with like companies and investment banks, even in like Africa and Latin America, have the same impacts. There's a lot of Chinese investments as well as international finance institutes in us. So I think at the same time, even having CSOs working not only throughout Southeast Asia, but even more broadly internationally and kind of working together, because I think, like, ultimately corporations, I believe their mission is for profit maximization, and even though they have they claim to have the best interests of local communities, I think there is maybe some disparity in terms of what is actually more at stake for companies versus local communities. So I think maybe that is another thing to consider among CSOs to work also intercontinentally as well as connections. It might be another.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, important because these issues are linked geographically, so there is ongoing work not only connecting within this region, but with different regions and also global networks when it comes to corporate accountability. I'm conscious of time, so I might, if any of the panelists want one brief concluding thought, then we'll wrap up, and hopefully for those that are around, have opportunity more for sort of discussions after the panel. If not,
Well, are you saying I should speak?
I'm saying you should. I jumped the gun.
If not. But no, I honestly, I just wanted to say that it always personally gives me inspiration when I hear about the work that's being done by, by people like Hugh, and of course you, Gary, and Sochiata and others as well. I mean, I think going back to that theme of persistence, I think if we didn't have people like yourselves as well as the communities who are willing to stand up and try to make things different, we wouldn't be at the stage where we are at the moment. And big policies or guidelines or frameworks like the UN Guiding Principles and others really need to be based on those lived experiences, on the work that is being done by people on the ground. So at the end of the day, I think, despite all of the difficulties, I think we can have hope. We can have hope for the optimism because there are people like all of you here today. So that's just really what I wanted to say.
On that note, we'll wrap up. Thank you, Pichimon, and thank you everyone for joining on a Friday night. Please do join in the diverse initiatives and efforts that are happening in this region to protect people's rights across borders. And thank you very much for coming along tonight. Many times, don't be so.
My t-shirt, ไม่เป็นไรเสื้อโอเค